Welcome back, sailors. This is another episode of Bruise News with the captain. Let's jump right into it. You guys like my Dragon Ball Z shirt? Just saying. Vegeta's my boy. Anyways, we just finished UFC on ESPN 2 with Lawler and Covington. We just finished that card about an hour ago, 2 hours ago, I think. There's a big gap between that, but that's fine. The card ended up being way better than expected in terms of the all-around finishes that had happened. There was a lot of finishes from top to bottom. We are only going to cover the last 3 fights of the card in terms of the predictions, because those are the ones that I gave. Usually the last 3 fights on a card are the most important for the division and all that stuff. So looking at it as a whole, the whole card, it ended up being a lot better. Now, I know the final result wasn't what everybody wanted to see, but sometimes that's just the way that it goes with these UFC cards. It's unpredictable. It's not what people wanted to see, but again, for argument's sake, it was the logical decision in the main event. It wasn't the logical decision, it was the logical outcome that people should have come to. I know that a lot of people don't like Colby, but we're going to get into that. First, we had the Javi Paris versus Joaquim Silva fight. Now, I had no idea that Javi Paris was a Firas Sahabi prodigy. I had no idea. I had just heard about him coming in here, so the fact that he had got so much clout immediately when this happened, without knowing about it in general, was that's my bad. Sometimes this happens where guys come out of nowhere. I thought that he had actually competed in looking for a fight, but the truth is that he had his ins with Firas Sahabi, Dana White, and George St. Pierre. So he does have a good training team behind him. He does have a lot of understanding of the sport. He's got a lot of knowledge. He's only 23 years old, and the dude put on a perfect performance. He was absolutely amazing standing up. His striking was top notch, especially for his age, and watching him, he knew exactly how to set up his punches and where to go and where to have his head and where his hands had to be and stuff. And he was watching the fight in the exchanges very, very well. Even though Joaquim Silva was starting off very aggressive, Javi Paris stayed very well in the exchanges, and he just watched everything very clearly. And as soon as he got the timing down, he was landing consistency until he ended up landing the knockout shot, and he knocked Joaquim Silva unconscious. It was really awesome. It was a great fight. Did not go the way that I had thought. I thought that Joaquim Silva was going to win. He was an Ultimate Fighter finalist in Brazil versus Latin America. I forget which one it was exactly. But he had gotten second place, and he was on a 5-fight win streak. So you're going to have to forgive me for not being able to pick that one the most correctly. I didn't know Javi Paris was as good as he was, and now, after watching him, I know that he's a guy that people are definitely going to have to keep an eye out for. Moving on, we had Jim Miller versus Clay Guida. Now, this is another interesting fight. In my video, I had said that originally I thought that Jim Miller was going to win. And then when I thought about it more and more, I sort of moved my opinion over to Clay Guida being so efficient. The way he's efficient, he doesn't get a lot. I think he'd only been finished once in his entire UFC career, and that was by Chad Mendes landing that crazy uppercut. So although we've seen Guida get hurt a couple times, I didn't really think that Jim Miller was going to have the gas tank and the ability at his age at this point, and everything that he'd been going through with the Lyme disease. I didn't think that he would be able to win the fight. Boy, was I wrong. If you get a chance to look at this card and look at the highlights, as one fight you're going to want to pay attention to. I think the fight was only 2 minutes long or something like that, but boy, it was nuts. They started getting into crazy exchanges almost immediately. Both guys, they've been in the company for well over 10 years. I think Jim Miller actually has the most fights in UFC history at 30. I think he just passed Bisping. So the guy has a lot of fights and a lot of experience in there, and he's always kind of been a contender. Like, without being one, he's come close, but he's never really got there. Anyways, almost immediately they were getting into exchanges, and Clay Guida landed a really, really nice uppercut that jacked Jim Miller up. Clay Guida went after the finish, and Jim Miller ended up clipping Guida, and Guida shot for a takedown, and Jim Miller immediately hooked in and went straight for a guillotine, which Dominic Cruz made a good point of. Jim Miller's best finishing move in all of his fights has been the guillotine choke. He has 9 submission wins, and like 8 of them are or 7 of them. I think it's something crazy like that. I think he has a really nasty leg lock on Oliveira, but that's besides the point. Anyways, he got the guillotine in, and he ended up choking Clay Guida unconscious. It was crazy. It was crazy. I couldn't believe it when I watched it. I was like, wow, I did not see that coming at all. So hands off to Jim Miller. That's 2 predictions wrong at this point, which is pretty normal. Usually I only get 1 right, and it's the last one. But that was pretty impressive, and kudos to Jim Miller for that one. So, moving on to the last fight. It was Colby Covington versus Robbie Lawler. Now, I hate Colby Covington. I do not like him as a person. I do not like him as a fighter. I think that he's boring, but he put on one hell of a performance tonight. It was exceptional how well he did against Robbie Lawler, and although I don't like to give credit to people who are kind of pieces of shit like that, he fought a very good fight. Especially, he fought a really good fight against the guy who, by all standards, is a beast. Like, Robbie Lawler is an absolute savage animal. Like, we've seen this stuff, like with him and Rory McDonald in the Rory McDonald fight, when his lip is like literally split in half, and he's like staring at Rory McDonald like "Whoa, let's do this." Like, the guy's an animal. Like, we've seen it before lots of times. The guy is an absolute beast. Well, Colby Covington, he mixed it up real well, and although he wasn't landing shots that would ever threaten anybody, like, he wasn't throwing anything that would have knocked Robbie Lawler out ever. He was thrown to the body, he was thrown to the head, and then he would mix up the shots standing with takedowns, which is usually his go-to ability. Is the wrestling. His wrestling is very good. I had a friend today actually comment on a post because he was like, "Oh, I think I might throw money down on Lawler," and I said, "I don't think that's a good choice, even though Lawler is definitely the underdog in this fight because of the RDA versus Lawler match, and then RDA versus Colby Covington match." Although the logic, you can't really use MMA math like that. Sometimes it does work, and he had said that his argument was that Robbie Lawler, although he lost to RDA, although RDA lost to Covington, Robbie Lawler is such a big, strong guy that he doesn't match up well stylistically, and he said that styles make fights. And I said to him, your argument just collapsed on itself, because you said that because Robbie Lawler is so big and so strong, and since his style makes for a good fight, that his style matches up well against Colby Covington. But I made it to a point that if you, not to use MMA math, but if you use your logic here for a second, if RDA was able to dominate Robbie Lawler with his wrestling, with his superior wrestling, being a smaller man, then you'd think that Colby Covington, being a larger guy than RDA and beating RDA, he'd be able to beat Robbie Lawler. Well, that was the outcome. Colby Covington, again, mixed everything up. He threw a total of 600 strikes, which is a lot for a fight. Again, nothing was really too effective, but his wrestling was really, really on point, and he was just out-grappling Robbie Lawler anywhere. And that's the thing with American wrestling, is it's not like where you see Khabib or GSP, where these guys are able to land really dominant ground and pound. American wrestling is more like being a stick in the mud, and they just want to be able to hold you down, and then they give you a little space to get back up, and then they drag you down, and they keep dragging you down, and it just tires you out until they grind you down until you're too tired. And although Robbie was never really, at any point in the fight, he was never like, you could never see that he was trying to quit or that he'd given up. He was definitely annoyed by the style, because it's an annoying style to watch and to probably deal with. But he wasn't frustrated, and he kept trying to beat Colby any way that he could. But Colby, living up to the name, I kind of understand the name Chaos. I don't think it has anything to the way that he is personally outside of the octagon. Although he does create a lot of chaos that way, I think it more attributes to how his fight style is. And it didn't seem like he really knew even what he was going to do. He would be standing up, and then he'd be going down, and then he'd be throwing punches and going to the body and then going down for takedowns. There was really no there was no method to the chaos. Like there was no logic between any of the decisions that he was making. He was just going about everything like without thinking about it once. He would just do whatever he could to get the job done, and that worked. That worked for him. He won the fight. It was 50-45 every scorecard except for one. The first judge scored at 50-44, which I kind of agreed with at that point because Lawler barely landed any shots at all. And then Colby, after the fight, they brought him upstairs to talk to Rashad Evans, and they did a little interview up there, and Kamaru Usman was up there, and they got into yelling at each other, and it wasn't really anything like intelligible at that point. You know, they were just kind of talking some high school shit. They were laughing, like fake laughing at each other's jokes and talking about knocking each other out. Neither of those guys are going to knock either of them out. Like, it's going to be a grappling match, and whichever grappler is better at that point is going to win. So there's not much else to that. Kudos to Colby Covington. I still don't like you. You're still a bitch. But you won the fight, and you fought a good fight, and you beat a guy who a lot of people wanted to see break your face off. So hats off to you. You made it out another day, but I'm telling you, man, that day is coming. Nobody avoids that day forever. At some point, somebody is going to beat you real bad, because that's the way that MMA works. Is at some point, somebody beats you. Just the way that it goes. It always happens. Moving on, UFC 241 is next weekend, and it's a crazy stacked card. So I can't wait to do my prediction video for that. I probably won't do it in 2 days, which is Monday or Tuesday. I probably won't do the prediction video that day. I'll probably wait until the Thursday or Friday to do my prediction video, but there's a lot. I think I might end up doing the whole main card. There's just a bunch of good fights. Asuncao is on that card. McDessie's on that card. Nate Diaz is on the card. Stipe versus DC is on the card. Yoel Romero versus that real big guy. Oh, I forget his name right now. There's so many names flipping through my brain right now. So there's so much going on. It's such a stacked card. I cannot wait to watch it. It's going to be amazing. Lastly, just a little thought to pop out there. I've always kind of thought that it was odd that the UFC has such scattered cards, and I don't understand why they don't try to narrow it down to having the fighters fight around the same times. Now, I know that injuries play into effect, but a lot of the times people's training camps aren't lining up properly because they have to take a specific amount of time off. But what if the UFC set it up so that if they did a UFC, like let's say UFC 241 comes up, and I think I have talked about this before, but let's say, for example, that UFC's 241 is coming up, because it is next weekend, and it's DC versus Stipe. Why not have all of your heavyweight fighters fight at that time? Have all the guys who are looking at contenderships do your number one contender matchups, have your heavyweights to kind of fill it out, and then at the bottom of the card for the Facebook prelims or whatever, you end up throwing a couple old scramble matches in there that are just kind of to build people up to put them into the top 10 or the top 15. That way, when people are done the fights, everybody can take the same amount of time off. They can get the same amount of training camps. If an injury occurs, you can move back and look at another fighter who's had the exact same amount of time off. It just seems like a far more efficient way of getting the fighters to roll into title shots and roll into having other fights than having to worry about injuries and if people are available for this date or where they are then. It just seems far more efficient. I think that is sort of what Bellator does more, and I'm not necessarily agreeing with the system that Bellator has, but I feel like the UFC could do it a lot more efficiently with the with everything that they have at their fingers. They have so much more in terms of medical teams and doctors and sports therapists and all that stuff, that it shouldn't be as hard doing that stuff for them as it is for other organizations that don't have the support and backup by bigger organizations like the UFC does. Anyways, I want to thank everybody for watching the video. I hope you liked it. Please give it a like. A thumbs up would be great. A share would be great. And a subscribe would be fantastic. Thanks, everyone, and make sure you have a good one.